This video is about installing sshd on a Ubuntu system. sshd is the secure shell daemon, so it acts as the server side for SSH access. So I don't recommend you install this unless you want to administer a system remotely, because every time you install something, if you just have a desktop system, you don't need this. But every time you install something, or at least have it running, it's a point of ingress for malware or bad actors. So we're doing it because we want to administer our systems. So let's have a look at our system. So the first thing we need to do, this again is an administrative task, so I want to switch user to root. Now the reason I'm doing sudo you can do with one command, but I'm switching to root, 1, 2, 3, 4, because I want to do a series of commands. So if I need to do a series of commands, I switch user to root, like this, sudo-i. I always use sudo, and then I run as root for a while, and then I go back. But if I just need to do one thing, then I'll use sudo and the command name. So the first thing we need to do is install some software. So for decades, we've been able to do this with most Unix systems. There's a repository, and we just ask for what we want. So we know what we want. Oops, I'm going to use the apt command. So we just talked about some of these commands in the lectures, but apt install open ssh-server. And I'm going to say why, because I'm sure that I want to actually install it. So if I don't use the why, then it's going to pause and say, do you want to download this? But I definitely do want to download this. So notice the progress. It's downloading all of this stuff for me. So it should be doing a bunch of things. Notice it's setting up systemd, setting up UFW, so let's just remember these things. We don't have to know what they are yet. We're going to be talking about them. It sets up sshd config. So this is the server side. I'm going to pause it because it's taking a while. Oh no, there we go. It's ready. So now it's installed it. So now we're using the system control command. And the installation script will also have used this command to set it up and start it. But let's see what's going on, the statuses of sshd. So it's actually running it for us. So it's all set, it's ready to go, it's running. So this was done by the installer, and we didn't have to do it. If for whatever reason I want to make sure that nobody can get on my system using sshd, then I can stop it. And there you see it tells me that it's loaded on the system, but it's inactive and dead. So it's not running right now. So I would want to do that. Let's say I thought somebody was attacking my system. I'm in front of the system. I think somebody's attacking it. I need to shut it down. I would shut down sshd. But I don't really want to do that. I want to have it running. So even though the script had done it for me, I just stopped it. So I'm going to have to start it. So normally you won't have to do that. It's going to be done for you. Let's have a look. There we go. So it's back up again. I just did that to demonstrate. It's Q to quit this and get the prompt back. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that if the system reboots for whatever reason, I want to make sure that it's actually going to be running. So I want to make sure that I can get into it remotely if the system happens to reboot. Because if I don't, then I'm going to have to go into wherever the system is and have it rebooted. So in this case, it's not that bad because we can have the IT people do it. But so right now, we have an open system. Yes, it's layered, but right now we have no firewall set up on our system. So if we type UFW, oops, sorry, I thought I was here. It says that it's inactive. So what we want to do is we want to enable UFW, and then which means that our system is protected. So now it's active, but I want to allow people to get into it using SSH. Well, mostly me. So what I need to do is I have to type UFW. This is uncomplicated firewall. It's simple. We're going to get into the details of it, but sometimes we need to use things before we truly understand them. But part of this course is hopefully. So I've added a rule, and now if I look at UFW status, I see that I'm allowing TCP/IP, sorry, over TCP/IP, the TCP protocol, either IP version 4 or IP version 6 on port 22. So that means I'm allowing SSH into this system. So that's fine. At this point, now what we've done is we've installed sshd. We made sure it's running. We know it's running by status. We know that it's going to come up when we reboot. So we're not too worried about that. And we've allowed access through the firewall. So the last thing we need to do is test access through the firewall. So I've asked you to install something called MobaXterm, but you can all we really need is an SSH client here. So I'm going to use MobaXterm because I've asked you to install it, and I want you to see what it looks like. It's a very useful client because of the way it does the port forwarding for X11. Again, that will mean something soon. So here, let's use MobaXterm to connect to my system. So I had already checked my system. I did show to determine the IP address. So loop back, that's a self-reference. And number 2 is my actual NIC, my network interface card that's on this system. And see here I have iNet 10.172.20.218. That's my IP address. And this is the net mask. This is the net mask and the net filter. So my IP address is 10.172.20.218. So if I want to get into that, I have to SSH to it using that IP address. So I can't use my host name because my host name has not been added to a DNS. So if it... Oh, that's interesting. I don't know what happened there. Give me a second. So I'm not sure why it closed my console, but it doesn't really matter because I want to access it remotely. So let's go in here. So I've already used this. I set up a session. I set up a new session, SSH, and I gave my IP address. And well, let's do 10.172.20.218 is my IP address, and I'm going to use the username Sue. And of course, the default port for SSH is 22. So I'm going to say OK. So now I'm going to connect using this. So I type in the password 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, now I've just given my password. And I'm going to save it on my system, not necessarily. So now I'm actually connected to that VM using SSH, and I can do anything that I would normally do using SSH. So let's try the system control. Let's look at my history. Oops. So sshd is actually a service. So the unit is of service type, but I don't need to put service because that's the default. So I'm going to say, what's the status of my sshd? And since I'm looking for status, I don't need to be root. So if I want to stop it or start it, I'm going to have to be root. But if I'm just looking for status, this is what I'll see. So I know it's running because I've been able to connect using SSH. And here I can close this if I want to. And there I have my nice little MobaXterm client, and I'm logged on using Sue. So now I know everything is working and I'm fine with my system. So I know, 1, I've installed sshd. 2, it's running. 3, it will run on reboot. 4, the firewall allows SSH. And 5, I tested all of the above by accessing so all of this is done. So we're good to go.